Something just happened between Canada and the United States, and if you've been watching this trade battle closely, you know this could be one of the biggest turning points yet. Because tonight, Washington may have just blinked first. The United States ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, has suddenly canceled a major public appearance in Ottawa and has now been called back to Washington for what officials are describing as urgent high-level meetings. And honestly, the timing couldn't be more revealing, because this isn't happening at a moment of American momentum. This isn't happening while Washington is projecting strength. This is happening at the exact moment President Donald Trump's aggressive tariff strategy appears to be running into serious trouble on multiple fronts. The same strategy Trump sold as unstoppable. The same strategy his administration claimed would give America all the leverage. The same strategy that was supposed to pressure countries like Canada into backing down is now facing legal challenges, growing international resistance, economic backlash, and increasing diplomatic pressure from allies around the world. And suddenly, the same administration that spent months talking tough behind podiums and on campaign stages now appears to be holding emergency conversations behind closed doors. And that's exactly why this story is impossible to ignore tonight. Because for months, Washington projected absolute confidence. They mocked Ottawa, they pressured Ottawa, they warned Canada not to push back, they acted like Canada had nowhere else to turn. But now, something feels different. Because if Washington really is blinking first, if the pressure is starting to shift, then this may be far bigger than a diplomatic scheduling change. This could be the first visible sign that the balance in U.S.-Canada relations is starting to move. And if you believe Canada standing strong under pressure from Washington is one of the biggest geopolitical stories unfolding right now, subscribe to I Love Canada. Because tonight, we're breaking down why panic may be building inside Washington, and why what happens next could reshape the future of Canada-U.S. relations.
Hoekstra has canceled a planned speaking appearance in Ottawa as he has been called back to Washington. This news comes just over 1 hour before Hoekstra was scheduled to be a featured speaker at the 2026 Canada Strong and Free Networking Conference in Ottawa. Organizers say he was called back to D.C. for urgent meetings.
And this may be the moment the entire story started to change. Because the trigger behind this sudden tension doesn't appear to be diplomacy. It appears to be a serious legal blow to President Donald Trump's tariff strategy. According to reporting and analysis from CTV News commentator Eric Ham, major parts of Trump's tariff framework are now facing significant legal challenges in U.S. courts, raising real questions about how much authority the White House can actually use moving forward. And politically, that's massive, because for years, tariffs weren't just policy for Trump, they were his signature weapon. Apply pressure, create uncertainty, push allies to the edge, force negotiations from a position of fear. That was the strategy. And for a while, it worked. Around the world, many governments hesitated to challenge Washington directly. After all, the United States was still seen as the world's biggest economic heavyweight, capable of hitting back harder than anyone else. But then, something started to shift. Countries began realizing that pressure only works if people still believe in it. And if there's one leader who seems to have recognized that early, it may be Prime Minister Mark Carney. Because Carney didn't just push back against Trump's trade pressure. He changed the conversation. Instead of treating Washington's threats as unstoppable, Canada took the fight public. Canada brought the conversation to allies. Canada pushed the issue onto the global stage. And slowly, the narrative began to change. Instead of Trump being seen as the deal maker with all the leverage, more countries started viewing the trade pressure as a source of instability, uncertainty, and growing economic risk. And that changes everything. Because the moment countries stop fearing economic pressure, that pressure starts losing its power. And right now, that may be exactly what we're watching unfold. Even analysts inside the United States are now openly asking a question that would have seemed unthinkable just months ago. Does Washington still hold all the cards? Think about that for a second. This is the same administration that said America had all the leverage. The same administration that claimed Canada had no choice but to fall in line. The same voices that insisted Canada couldn't afford to challenge access to the U.S. market. That was the narrative. So if America still holds all the leverage, why the emergency meetings? Why the sudden silence? Why the legal scramble? And why does Washington suddenly seem to be recalculating? Because the reality may be becoming harder and harder to ignore. Canada may need the United States as a partner, but the United States may need Canada a whole lot more than Washington ever wanted to admit.
And so I think what we're seeing here right now is this could possibly be the White House trying to figure out a response as we move into, of course, the CUSMA review and President Donald Trump pressing Europe on an agreement on trade as well.
Could this signal more tension to do with those upcoming CUSMA talks?
I don't know if it signals more tension. I think what it could be is the White House is now desperately looking for leverage. Remember, we got an alleged handshake deal with Europe that appears to not be moving in the direction that the president wants. Now all of his tariffs have been deemed, or most of them have been deemed unconstitutional, which leaves him very little leverage and maneuverability. And so right now, I think what we're seeing here is this could just possibly be what is the way forward, particularly for this administration, when already their hands are tied on so many other issues.
And this may be where the pressure on President Donald Trump starts becoming impossible to ignore. Because right now, from Canada's point of view, Washington doesn't appear to be dealing with just one challenge. It looks like three major pressures may be hitting all at once. First, the legal pressure. Court challenges are raising serious questions about how far the White House can go with tariffs and trade powers moving forward. The very tools that once gave Washington enormous leverage are now facing growing scrutiny. Second, the diplomatic pressure. Around the world, allies aren't responding the way they once did. Countries that may have quietly backed down in the past are now pushing back, building new trade partnerships, and looking for alternatives beyond American pressure. And Canada has been right at the center of that shift. And third, the political pressure. At home, economic uncertainty continues to dominate the conversation, and every new trade battle brings fresh questions about long-term stability, business confidence, and global trust. Put those three pressures together, and suddenly the situation becomes far more serious than a simple trade dispute. Because for Trump, tariffs were never just about economics. They were about image, about leverage, about showing strength, about convincing allies and voters that Washington always held the upper hand. It was political messaging as much as economic policy. But the moment courts begin limiting those tools, the moment allies start resisting publicly, the moment the global conversation begins shifting, that image of total control starts facing its toughest test yet. And politically, that could matter a lot in the battles still to come. Because in politics, leverage only works as long as people believe you still have it. And tonight, more and more people are beginning to ask a very different question. Is Washington still controlling the game, or is the game starting to change?
I think right now, the courts have basically stripped the president of any power on the tools that he has been able to use to threaten and to bully and to gain leverage in talks. And so now they have to figure out what the next step is. I thought it was very surprising that in the face of this ruling, we did not get a response, and we still have not from the White House. And so I think what they're doing right now is scrambling to try to figure out how do they, in fact, move forward. And to say nothing of the fact that what this means domestically for the president, who is seeing his approval ratings continue to crater as he looks ahead to the midterm elections, where it's looking more and more likely like his party will suffer a massive, massive loss.
Some people might look at this story and say, come on, ambassadors fly back to Washington all the time. Fair point. But in politics, context matters, timing matters. And right now, both are raising serious questions. Pete Hoekstra was scheduled to speak publicly in Ottawa, and then suddenly that appearance was canceled, not for a routine trip, not for a planned meeting, but for what officials are calling urgent meetings in Washington, right as President Donald Trump's tariff strategy faces legal challenges, diplomatic pushback, and growing international resistance. And that doesn't feel random. That feels like a White House trying to reassess. Fast. Because right now, Washington may be trapped. Push harder and risk even more global backlash. Step back, and months of tough political messaging suddenly look a lot less convincing. And here's where Canada changed the game. Trump's team may have assumed Canada would eventually fold under pressure, but instead, Canada adapted. Canada diversified. Canadian leaders built new partnerships, and public trust toward Washington started shifting. And that may be the real story here. Because America's biggest advantage with Canada was never fear. It was trust. And once trust starts fading, leverage fades with it. So what we're watching now may be bigger than tariffs, bigger than one trade fight. This could be about the credibility of American power itself. For months, Washington projected total confidence. But tonight, Washington looks unusually quiet. And in politics, silence during a crisis often means one thing. Serious conversations are happening behind closed doors. And when a superpower starts recalculating, the whole world notices. For more deep analysis, subscribe to I Love Canada.